Okay, today we get to talk to the lovely Teri Nine. We're really excited to talk to her. She is a scholar. She has studied much about many important topics. She schooled her children, but I would like her to introduce herself and tell a little more about her story. Teri, take the floor. It's your turn. Tell us a little bit
Well,
about where you were born, where you grew up, your experiences there.
okay. I was born in Mexico, in the state of Sonora, born and raised, till I was about almost 13, and we moved out to Texas, to the Lubbock area, where I attended high school. And once I graduated from there, I went on to BYU and graduated from there in '86. And then
What was
I
your degree there? Sorry.
my degree was in travel and tourism.
Wow.
I
Okay.
love geography. Just ask my family. Anything that has to do with maps and going anywhere and seeing things, I just love it. I'll even stop a movie in the middle of a movie to look up a place because
Wow.
to me the movie becomes more real if I can see where it is on the map and everything. So I love geography and I love travel. So that was my major. And then I had a job lined up, a great job lined up right after graduation. So I had an apartment, I had just bought a car, and I was ready to start this job. And I was going to live with a couple of my friends who were still going to school there at BYU. And 2 weeks before the job started, they called me up in tears saying, "We're so sorry, but we have to lay people off instead. So we can't hire you after all."
And you just bought a car.
And I had just bought a car and signed a contract for an apartment. So it was crunch time to try and find something, and I couldn't find anything. So my dad, who lived in El Paso at the time, my parents lived there, he says, "Well, I might have some people around here, I'll start asking." And so he started asking and found me like 3 different interviews down there, all of which I flew down, interviewed, and they all offered me a job. So I ended up taking one of them. And I worked for about 2 or 3 years until I met Bob. He was in the YSA program there. And I had been dating somebody else, but even though I really liked him and we had a lot of fun and did a lot of great dancing together, I just knew he wasn't the right type of person for me. And so I started praying. I was like, "Heavenly Father, everybody else is a foot too short," which is unacceptable to me because I'm very tall.
How tall were you in college or after college?
5'11",
Oh yeah.
and just short just was not going to do it for me. And the only tall guy was the one that I was dating, and I knew wasn't right for me. And so I was like, "Okay, Heavenly Father, just I'm going to leave it in your hands." And within 3 months, Bob moved in. He came from Germany. He had been stationed in Germany. And so he came in and moved into Fort Bliss there in Texas. And I met him, saw him. At first time I ever saw him was his big orangutan arms at the front of the institute class. He was always answering the questions, and I thought, who is this conceited person thinking that he just knows everything? Let somebody else answer for once. No, he wouldn't let anybody answer. He just always had to answer.
So you didn't see, hey, it's another tall guy. You're like, oh, he's so annoying. What?
He was annoying. It just was annoying to
Poor
me.
Bob.
And I was still kind of sort of seeing this other guy, but more like friends now. And so we had shown up together and sat at the back because we got there late. And yeah, I just thought he was very annoying. But then we ended up kind of just everywhere together. We were everywhere together. We were at family home evening every Monday night together with the YSA, and then on Wednesdays we had institute, and on Thursdays there was something else, and Fridays and Saturdays usually an activity every weekend. And on Sundays we had church, and after church our bishop would always have a homemade ice cream social where we just went and hung out with the bishop and his wife. And then on the days that we didn't have anything, I'd go to the post office or the grocery store or whatever, or the mall, and oh look, there's Bob. Like literally for 6 months practically, we were everywhere, the same time, the same place, the same day. And I was just like, I can't get away from this guy. But the more I got to know him, the more I was like, wow, well, he has all these traits and character things that I like, and they're all on my yes list. And the more I got to know him, the more he just inspired me. I wanted to be better. I was like, I should be more like that. I want to be more like that. And he said the same about me at some point. And so I think we just kind of were like, wow, I like this. So eventually he finally asked me out. Finally.
So this realization was all before you had officially gone out on a date, just
Yes.
seeing each other.
Yes.
Okay.
Because we had non-dated like every single day for months. And when I really realized that it was him that I really was hooked on and really liked is, I remember Memorial Day weekend, the YSA would always have a camp out up in Alamogordo, New Mexico. And this particular weekend, David Pratt, who was the guy that I was dating, was going to Alamogordo. I couldn't go because I had to work that weekend. Every other weekend we would switch off, and so I had the whole travel agency to myself that weekend, and I couldn't get out of it. So I had to work, so I had to stay in El Paso. And Bob couldn't go because he had a maneuver to do for the Army for that whole weekend. And I can't remember for the life of me what it was. I don't know if it was a movie that I was watching or what, but something I saw or read something, and immediately my first reaction was like, oh, with all my heart, I wish I could share this with Bob. And then I caught myself and I was like, wait, Bob? Why did I say Bob? Normally it's like, David. I'm like, why am I thinking Bob? Why do I want to share this with Bob? He's the big orangutan arm guy. That's when I realized that I was kind of falling for him and liking him. And so he finally asked me out, and the rest is history.
Wow. And you guys have 3 kids.
Three
right?
kids.
Okay.
Yep. All of them, all grown up.
They're all grown. And the last one's getting married at the end of the year, right?
Pretty soon.
Wow. That's so exciting.
Yep.
So back up just a little bit. You talked about growing up in Sonora, and you just mentioned it like that. That's like a big deal. You've talked about fond memories of where you lived, and it's historically a significant place to live. Do you want to talk more about the colonies and things there?
Sure. So my father was born and raised in the Mormon colonies, which is in the state of Chihuahua. So it's adjacent to Sonora. And he's a direct descendant of Frederick G. Williams, and through his mother's side. His mother was a Williams. And so he was born and raised down there. And then when he was 11, his mother passed away in childbirth, and his father moved to Sonora because he was working on the mines there.
Okay.
And so that's kind of where the rest of the kids, he and his younger siblings all grew up. And then when he went to college, he attended the University of Arizona, and that's where he met my mom. But part of what got him through college was that he was a crop duster down in Mexico, he and his older brother.
Okay.
They learned to fly a plane before they learned how to drive. So flying was just in his blood. He loved it. So this was his job. And so after they got married, or, they were engaged, he talked to my mom and said, well, I have this crop dusting job, and it should be only like 6 to 9 months, do you mind if we go down and live in Mexico while we do this? And she later told me, I was so in love and so stupid, I just said yes, not knowing the sacrifices it would mean for her, who comes from a very upper class, world traveling and important family. Like, my grandpa worked for the U.S. government. He was economics dean and professor at several universities: UCLA, UC Berkeley, University of Arizona, University of Hawaii. He was British attaché, and he was a treasury appointment to China also. And my grandma, who's a librarian, was one of the best in the United States, who started the first national library. The government asked her to start the first national library at Yosemite. So she set that up, organized it, created it. And when China realized that she was the wife of this man who was coming to help them with their treasury and all of that, they said, hey, we don't have a good Chinese system. Can you help us set up a system? So she went over there and helped them set that up.
So she set up their national library kind of thing?
Yes.
Or, wow.
Because they were not on the Dewey system. And so that she helped them get on that system and taught them how.
Wow. Imagine doing that in Chinese.
So when I say my mom came from an upper class, my grandfather was at Bretton Woods, which is what helped set up the World Economic Forum. Eventually, it was a predecessor to the World Economic Forum. He was there for that. And then she married my dad, who came from a very, very poor family. Like, he told us several times, he had one pair of shoes, one pair of pants, and 2 shirts, and that was it. And they lived in a little shack in the mountains of Mexico, and every day he would go barefoot to school, and they would have to walk across the railroad tracks to go to school. And they ate a lot of oatmeal and liver, which he could never stand after he grew up. He was like, I will never eat oatmeal and liver again, because that was the poor man's meal.
Yeah.
And he had so much of it every day of his life that he got sick of it.
Wait, and Sonora is desert, so he's walking barefoot in the hot desert.
Well, it is part desert and part jungle. Half and half, just about.
So if the rocks and cactus don't get you the snakes.
I grew up in the deserty half of it, the western half of it. So I grew up, 25 miles to our west was the ocean, 25 miles to our east was the jungle.
Wow.
And he grew up in the mountains, the northeastern mountains.
Okay.
He grew up actually until he was almost 12 in Chihuahua, which is kind of a desert. The Mormon colonies are kind of deserty. But then when they moved to Sonora, it was more mountainous, jungle kind of a place.
So he was a hard worker.
They were just very, very poor. They had 9 kids. They had nothing, right? And because my grandmother had passed away, my grandfather was kind of rough. And so being with a ruffian, they didn't learn a whole lot of good manners or anything like that. So when they got married, again, like Bob had said, my father said, I married up several levels up. And
yeah, that's really stark contrast.
Yes.
Wow.
It was a big, very, very big contrast. So when they got married, he says, well, you go down and live in Mexico for just a few months. Oh, sure, I'll do that. So they moved to Mexico. They lived in a little 24-foot trailer. She was 9 months pregnant. And before they had moved into the trailer, she was 9 months pregnant and slept on a cement floor.
Oh my goodness.
For several months until they could get the trailer on the farm in the heat and humidity. Its average is 100 to 115 degrees.
And where did she move from?
And she was in Tucson, Arizona.
Okay, so she kind of knew heat, but not.
She knew heat, but not like this. And not with the humidity.
I'm dying just hearing this story.
And so,
Turn on the AC. Oh, just
yes.
kidding. It's nice and cool in your house.
So that's where they ended up staying and living, because the man who he was crop dusting for sold them the farm. So they bought the farm because that was what my dad and his older brother, that was what their college degree was in, husbandry and agriculture. And so animal husbandry and agriculture. So they bought the farm. So they ended up staying. So she ended up having to teach herself Spanish. And it took several years, and she never really quite mastered it all the way. So it was cute, because she would still, till the day they died, she would mix up some words or, articles or whatever. And we always made fun of her for it, but it was just a family thing. We loved her for it.
Wow.
And it was quite the experience, and I am so, so grateful that I grew up down there. Even though it was in the 60s, in the 70s.
Yeah, what was that like in Mexico?
Well, it's a very small town, very, very small town. Now, not so much, but back then it was very small. And so it was very nice because it was Mayberry. It was ideal. Yes, there were some issues and problems, but for the most part, it was about, on average, 20 years behind culturally and socially from what the United States was like. So everybody was still married. You'd never hear of divorce. Everybody went to church on Sundays. It just was the good old-fashioned, we grew up with good, strong morals. All of our friends had good, strong morals.
Wow.
There wasn't all the societal uproar of the 60s down there, because we were behind the times, right? And we didn't get to see like movies that came to the movie theaters. Then it took them like years before they'd go down there and we'd see them. So we were behind on the movies.
Oh, wow.
Which ended up being a blessing, because we were able to focus on family and work and school and having fun with our friends. And we didn't have to worry about the internet and technology and all of the social uproar that was happening in bigger cities and in the U.S. at the time. And so it was a very protected childhood. So we were allowed to be children, and it was great, and it was wonderful. And yet at the same time, like I said, it wasn't perfect, but our parents were always there, and our friends' parents were always there, and it seemed like everybody was on the same page, like morally and, integrity-wise, and faith and God and religion and education and proper etiquette. And so whenever something would go wrong or bad, or we made a bad choice or whatever, all the parents, they were all in this together, kind of.
So you had several people guiding you, helping you, teaching you.
Yeah. Mostly our parents. But should anything ever happen, they knew that the other parents would be there,
That's really neat.
to catch us or to correct us or to whatever. So it was kind of nice. Really old-fashioned. For being modern, I'm at the very tail end of baby boomers, so kind of modern at the time. But for being modern at the time, we were not modern at all. We were very old-fashioned. And boy, am I grateful
Vintage.
for that. Very, very grateful for that now.
What a special place to grow up.
It was a great place to grow up.
And then you moved up to Lubbock when you were how old?
Almost, I was 12, so almost 13.
Okay.
I was just a couple months shy.
Ooh, that's a big contrast when you're a teenager.
A culture shock.
Yeah.
Yes. I immediately, within just 2 or 3 months, had to learn I learned just by hard knocks to go from a girl who was still playing with Barbies and her dolls to hurry up, do the Farrah Fawcett hairdo, do the Farrah Fawcett high heels, and do the Farrah Fawcett makeup, or you will not have friends.
Wow.
And so I had to learn really quick. And, that kind of plays havoc on your self-esteem at the moment. especially 13, 14 years old, right? When it counts the most, it seems like. So that was an experience, having to do all of that. And then my education in Mexico was much more advanced than it was in the US. So when I came out, I had just graduated 6th grade in Mexico. And I came and they had to test me to see where they should place me when I came out here. And they said they could actually place me in 9th or even 10th grade.
Wow.
When it came to like science and history and math, except for my English and my American history. So the counselor strongly suggested that I go with 7th or 8th grade instead. And so when we came out, my parents decided to go ahead and just do 8th grade. So that's where I started, was 8th grade. So I kind of sort of skipped a year. But they didn't want to put me too far ahead, with older kids, because again, I'm still playing with dolls, right? So 8th grade was far enough for me.
Is there anything that really anchored you during that time? Like, that's a huge change as a teenager. And
it is.
I mean, change of friends, and environment, and weather, where it was dry and cold for a lot of the year too.
And no mountains.
No mountains.
And no ocean.
Wow.
So like everything changed. I would have to say that my family was my anchor at the time, especially the first couple of years when my dad was still trying to make a go of a hog farm up there. So he was still there. Eventually it ended up that he just couldn't get into the business. The business here in the US was too big, too commercialized, and you can't just come out and start a little old hog farm and think that you can make it. And so that was a hard lesson for him to learn. But eventually he ended up having to go back to Mexico and continue working the farm down there with my uncle.
At that point, were you kind of grown and moving on to college? Or?
Well, no, I was around 15. So it was just first couple of years that he was there at home, and then he had to. So the end of my high school career, everybody thought that my parents were divorced because they never saw my dad. Oh. It was just my mom and me there. But no, they weren't divorced. But I think our family we've always been close, and we've always known, and we were raised, family is what matters. Family, family, family. That was just ingrained to us. And as I grew up, that's what I taught my family. Family is the most important thing. That's what it's all about. And so I think that really helped. We had not been active in the church down in Mexico for other personal reasons that my parents had, which is another story in itself. But they would take us to Sunday school and sacrament. Back in those days, they still had primary during the week. So we never went to primary, ever. We only went to Sunday school and sacrament. So they would take us and drop us off. And it was held in just a tiny little hole-in-the-wall house that was being rented by the church so that we could have church services there. Right across
That's
the street.
kind of like Wild West church, kind of.
Yeah. Just an old little house that was down there across the street from the grocery store. So we went to church. So we learned a little bit, and I knew that we were Mormon and that we had a really long name for our church. But by and far, I would say I grew up mostly Catholic because my friends were all Catholic and our school was Catholic.
Okay.
And so even for school, we would go to Catholic services and they would have us teach catechism at school. So in our school, we had a very small private school that I attended there, which as I look back on it now, I realize was really a homeschool. Except that she wasn't teaching her own kids, she was teaching other people's kids in her home. And so we had like maybe 13 to 15 students, and that spanned grades, kindergarten through 5th grade. So that was
Wow. And she was teaching all of
And
you
she was teaching
at the same time.
all of us, yeah. Her sister would teach kindergarten and first grade, and then she would teach second through fifth grade. And that spell of education for me was what taught me what education is really about. It was the best education I got just because of the way that she did it. We always had to, she would give us busy work, quote unquote, while she was teaching one class upper math, and she wanted us in second and third grade to do something. So we ended up copying chapters of our science book and of our history book into our own notebooks. So the process of reading it and then writing it down myself taught me so much. And to the point where there was one time that I came home. We always had lunch breaks at school for about an hour, and then I'd come home and eat, and then would go back. And so in the afternoon when I went back, this one time I hadn't gone home. I went next door to my friend's house to have lunch. I had permission to go to her house for lunch. So after the hour was up, at the end of that hour, she goes, "Oh, do you have your assignment on the moon? Because it's due after we get back." And I go, oh no, I forgot. So I just sat down really quick at her house and just wrote out what I remembered from having copied that whole lesson. So I wrote it out, and I wrote my paper on the moon, and it ended up being so good that the teacher said, "Who helped you with this? Did you go home? Who helped you with it?" And I was like, "Nobody helped me with it." She goes, "Somebody helped you with it." I was like, "No." And she didn't believe me. She really thought somebody had helped me with it. And even my friend was like, "No, she went next door with me to lunch and nobody was there." And so she knocked me down a whole grade because she thought, like on the paper, not grade wise, but they graded like 5 through 10 back then, not A, B, C. And so I remember I got like an 8 or an 8.5 instead of a 9 or 9.5 because she really thought. So I went home and told my parents, and I was so upset because I got a lower grade. And so my parents had to go back and talk to her and say, "No, she really didn't come home, and nobody really helped her. She really did it on her own." But that's just, and I'm not saying that to brag about me. I'm saying that because that's the level of education that she taught. And most of the kids in that school had that level. It was fantastic.
Wow.
It was fantastic. The last year in Mexico, I attended a nun school because she only went to 5th grade. So I had to go somewhere for 6th grade. So I attended a nun school, and it was a good school, but still not as good. So everything that I learned from 1st to 5th grade in her school had put me so much further ahead than the American schools that when I came out after 6th grade, I was ready to go into 9th grade in the U.S.
Wow.
Instead of starting back at 6th or 7th grade. That's just the level of education that they had back then. I don't think that they have it anymore. But
so it sounds pretty personalized. Like that was a really good
It was. It was very
experience.
personalized. And for all of us, it was just a really good school. She was very strict, but very fair. So yeah, I'm just very, very grateful.
That's really
for
cool.
all of the experiences I had down there and growing up down there, and we still would fly out to the U.S. all the time to visit grandparents, and it wasn't until I was nearly 15 that I finally met all of my other cousins. We only had my uncle that lived down in Mexico with us, and he had married a Mexican woman, and so we grew up with them, with their kids. They had 3 kids, and they were like brothers and sisters to me. But all of my other uncles and aunts were spread all over the globe, because we had several that were in the military, and so they were Korea, Germany, Alaska, that just everywhere.
So when you say family is important, it was a widespread family
Yes.
that you guys are keeping in contact with.
Yeah.
How did you guys keep in contact? Was it really just visiting each other, or what were some other ways?
With grandparents, we would go out, and my parents made sure that we went out minimum once a year, but it usually ended up being 2 or 3 times a year. We would go out and visit grandparents, and it was a little bit easier because my parents did all of their medical stuff and business and banking and everything in the U.S., and so that made it easier. So when we came out, they would have business to do, and we got to hang out with grandparents and visit them. But then, like, my mom only had 1 sister. My dad had 8 brothers and sisters, but they always stayed in touch. So they would call and we would talk, and I remember them forcing us to talk on the phone. This is why I hate talking on the phone.
Oh, okay.
For those listening.
So forcing a kid to talk on the phone is not always going to work.
They would force us, and we hadn't even met them in person. Well, this is your Aunt Velma, or this is your whoever, and you have to come say hi. And so just making small talk on the phone with people that I don't really know, other than I'm told that I'm related to them. So I was just kind of very uncomfortable. I didn't know them, at that age. It just, it doesn't seem real. You're like, who am I talking to? But grandparents we knew. We knew. And then when we moved out to the States, things just kind of turned out well for all of the families on my dad's side of the family, all of the siblings. At that particular time happened to just have been transferred back to the States or came back down south or whatever the reason, but we were all in the U.S.
Okay.
So they took an opportunity to have our first family reunion. So we had a family reunion, and that's where I finally met all of my other cousins. And I thought it was just the best thing ever. I had all these built-in friends. And so we just had a wonderful, it was 4 days, I think, that we spent there. And some of us stayed in the hotel. And there's all kinds of pranking. That side of the family, they love to prank. They love to be funny. And so it was just fantastic. So that's when I met all of my cousins.
That's so fun.
The rest of my cousins. So, yeah, it was quite the experience growing up down there. So I tell people I'm Mexican. I was born and raised down there.
Yeah, you really are.
For generations, my family's been from down there. And I don't look Mexican because I don't have the blood. But something I say is blood isn't what makes you Mexican. Because really, most of us have blood that comes from somewhere in Europe. That doesn't mean that you're French or that you're German,
Mm-hmm.
So, born and raised, cultural-wise, and I didn't realize how much it had affected me. Excuse me, I'm talking too much. Until we got out here, and we got married, we had kids, and I would start talking really fast and saying something, and they would laugh at me. My family would laugh at me because I would say it backwards. I would say it like you would say it in Mexico instead of
the way they place the verbs and things. Yeah.
And then we started watching family movies, and several of them had to do with a Mexican who met an American or something like that. And I remember being in the movie theater one day watching one of my favorite movies, and the main guy and the main girl in the movie, he was American, she was Mexican. They get married, and she does something that I had always done. And in the middle of the theater, Bob forgets that there's a theater full of people around us. He's all of a sudden, it's just him and me there watching this movie. And he just slaps his knee and he goes, "Oh my gosh, that's a Mexican thing? You're kidding me." He goes, I thought it was just you. And I was like, feeling validated, going, see, it's not just me.
Oh my
Everybody
goodness.
else does it. That was really funny. So that's a funny story for our family. But there's a lot of stories kind of like that where I'm just so Mexican. You know? And as my kids have grown older and they've watched some of these movies and other movies, and they'll pick out things that these Mexican people will do in the movies, and they're like, oh my gosh, that's another Mexican thing. And I was like,
goodness.
yeah, it is, isn't it? You're welcome.
That would be so exciting. It's like having a
So-
friend at the movie theater.
It wasn't until then that I realized, wow, I do a lot of things like Mexican people do. But what's funny is, down in Mexico, because I don't look Mexican, and because my mom was American, I wasn't quite, none of us were quite fully all the way accepted down there. We were always the gringos. We were the Americans. And so we weren't really some of their compatriots, you know, even though we
Gotcha.
were, but they didn't think that we were. We were always the Americans. We were the blondies, even though we're brunette, but we're blondies to them. But then when I come out to the U.S., I didn't quite fit in because my culture and my mannerisms are so Mexican that I came out to the U.S. and people would then, those first couple of years when it was like culture shock, a big part of the culture shock was that I was so Mexican in my mannerisms, and I would do things that were not acceptable in the U.S. and I didn't know they weren't acceptable, you know, like personal space. There's no such thing as personal space. I'm like, what the heck are you talking about?
Yeah.
We don't have that in Mexico, but there is here in the U.S. and don't cross it. So had to learn that the hard way.
Wow.
So there's a lot of, you know, just cultural mannerisms. I've just realized I'm 90% Mexican.
That's awesome.
Is what I am on the inside. And one of the things I really had a hard time getting used to was when we came out to the States. One is all of a sudden we had to clean our own house.
Oh my goodness.
We didn't have a maid.
That's culture
And
shock.
And I remember my mom saying, well, we're going to have to clean the house now. And I was like, what? I mean, it wasn't like, oh, that's beneath me. It wasn't like that. It was just like, what do you mean? But we have a maid. You know, the maid's not coming with us. So we had to, you know, learn how to clean house. And so I did. And that was a great blessing and lesson for me. And the other thing, what was the other thing I was going to tell? I think it just slipped my mind.
We'll see if it comes back. I do have a question for you.
I can't remember. It slipped my mind.
Okay, so we're probably getting close to wrapping up. I did want to ask, with your experience with education in Mexico, you chose to teach your own children in your home as they were growing up. How did you choose what to focus on? Because there's so many things as you're homeschooling and so many good things that you can choose from. How did you narrow that down? And what did you bring from your education experience in Mexico to kind of your homeschool table?
Well, what I brought is I definitely tried to remember a lot of the exercises for learning to read, learning to write, doing math. Math in Mexico is done a very different way than it is out here. It's a lot faster and a lot simpler, I think, for me, probably because I was taught that way. But it's very mental. And so I did my best to teach my kids how to do math the Mexican way, not, you know. In America, you'll teach them multiplication, division, and you write down, you know, you carry the 1 and you write it down, and you know, 3 times 5 is 15, and so you write the 5 down and carry the 1, and you write things down underneath the division table, or you write out the various excuse me, answers in multiplication. But in Mexico you don't. It's all mental. You keep it in your head. And so you go very fast because you don't have to spend time writing it all down. And funny side story is, to this day, I still do math and Spanish in my head.
I love that.
Math
Spanish
and
math.
typing was the other thing, because when we went into eighth grade, that's when they started teaching typing in junior high up in Lubbock. And I was still not super proficient in English. I was still I knew how to speak it, but I wasn't good at writing it and reading it. And so I would type all of my English lessons were in English, of course. So I would type them, but I would pronounce them in my head in Spanish. And so I got
Oh.
really, really fast because I play the piano. And so I just, muscle memory. So had really great muscle memory. So I got to type really, really fast. I learned how to type fast. But to this day, if I'm typing something out, I have to do it in Spanish. Otherwise, if I read it and I'm thinking in English what I'm typing, I make so many mistakes and it holds me up on my typing.
Whoa.
But
Okay.
if I read it like house,
Uh-huh.
I'll say ose, because it's
Okay.
House, ose. So I'll pronounce it in Spanish as I'm typing it, and I'll type it without mistakes.
Wow, I
Oh,
would have not known that because in any, I guess we've texted a lot. I have, you're very proficient and fluent and good with words, and I would have never guessed that you're double processing everything. That's amazing.
well, I think in Spanish and English. I dream in Spanish and English. For the longest time, it was just in Spanish.
Mm.
But I picked up. I'm musical, and so I pick up. When I first came out, I had an accent, so I talk like a Mexican. And if I get to talking really fast, you'll kind of start hearing some things come out that, I'll say things backwards, or I'll say things the Mexican way instead of the American way, and you can kind of start hearing an accent a little bit. But yeah, when it comes to typing, because I didn't know what the word was all the time in English. And so I would just kind of pronounce it in a Spanish way in my head.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I learned how to type. So I guess that stuck with me because I have to type it and think it out and pronounce it all in Spanish as I'm typing.
Wow.
And then I can go back and review it. And when I'm reading it, well, then I'm reading it in English.
Okay.
But it's just for the typing part. Just to get it out my fingers, I have to think of it in Spanish. And math, I'll do the same thing. When somebody will say, oh, it's 238 times 41. I'll go, ocho, tres, doce, and I do it in my head, and I'll give them the answer. A lot of times,
Wow.
probably just as fast as a computer calculator will
That's
do,
amazing.
but it has to be in Spanish. If I do it in English, it trips me up every time.
Oh my goodness.
But back
That's
to the
wild.
question that was a long side note. Sorry.
Yeah, what did you bring
So,
to the table of homeschool that
well,
you
when
enjoyed?
we sent our first daughter to school, and she had done kindergarten, which is all fine and great, but then in first grade, they start doing actual homework and things like that. And we had been feeling that we needed to homeschool, but weren't quite sure like when. It was like, oh, we'll do it one day. And I
Mm-hmm.
was kind of investigating it and studying it out and researching it. And finally, the day came, and she was like halfway through first grade. So we decided to homeschool. But immediately I knew, because I'd seen how they were teaching them to read and write, and immediately I knew I wanted to teach them some of the old fashioned things too. So I taught them cursive from the very beginning. It develops your brain in a different way, and it helps you actually be better at printing if you want to print later. But if you start with printing, you will hardly ever get anybody to learn cursive after that. It's very
Mm.
hard. They'll learn it, but then they'll give it up and they'll go back to just printing. And to me, it was important to learn cursive because most family history documents, even political documents, are all written in cursive. And if you don't know how to read it, you're not going to be in a good place. I'll just say that. And then math. I wanted to do math the Mexican way. I wanted to teach them how to do that the Mexican way. It was a little bit hard because the curriculum, I would choose it prayerfully. And with every child, it ended up being a little bit different because it's, what is it that clicks with them? And so, for example, with the first two kids, I was able to do a certain kind of math and a certain kind of language arts, English class. But with Emily, our last, I discovered when she was probably around 4.5, 5 years old, I realized something is not quite right here with her reading. And I realized I think she's dyslexic. We've never had her actually, officially tested, but she's dyslexic. And through the process of learning how to read and write and the various programs that we tried, lots of them, until we finally came across one that we liked. It's called Reading Horizons, and it was a computerized, it came on back in that day, it came on little DVDs, and they have an online thing too. And so teaching her how to read and write through that program actually taught me English. Finally, because for me and all of us, our whole joke all of these years has been is English needs to be fixed. I don't know if you've ever seen Pocahontas, the Disney Pocahontas. And there's a part in there where she's being taught how to read and write in English. And it's one of those, here, 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 or there, there, there. And well, what do you mean it's said the same way, but it looks different? Well, yes, but you pronounce it the same way. So you're like, English just needs to be fixed.
Especially after knowing Spanish your whole life. English is hard.
It is harder to learn.
It's a big jumble of
than it is if you grew up with English and then learned Spanish. People think that's hard. It is harder going the other way. But so that was always our joke, is English needs to be fixed. Because with the first two kids, I just taught them from the curriculum that we had. And there's these words that are like disobedient words. They don't follow the rules. And so you just have to know and understand that there's some words that just don't follow the rules. And that just always confused me and just didn't make sense. And I was like, English just needs to be fixed. Well, when we were teaching Emily, the program that we were teaching her explains all of those quote unquote disobedient words. So it teaches you how the English language is actually set up and why. And it teaches you these little tricks, like some letters have guardian letters by them and some don't. And if they do, you say it one way, and if they don't, you say it a different way. And all of a sudden you can start deciphering words as you look at them going, oh, look, I noticed there's a guardian word here, a guardian letter. So that means that this letter is going to have the long sound, not the short sound, and that kind of stuff. So as we went through that whole process, Bob realized, oh, this has been my issue all along. I'm dyslexic.
Oh my goodness, wow.
He recognized
after all that time.
His whole growing up and learning, recognized it because he saw Emily going through it. He was like, wow, that's just like me. Wow, that's just like me. And we realized, oh, this is why. So that guy back in institute class that had the orangutan arms and had all the answers was great and wonderful. It ended up being my husband, but it was so frustrating because I didn't know at the time. And so we would take turns reading that whatever, and he would kind of get caught up in the reading and have to kind of slow down. And I was like, I don't understand this. He's smart. He's a smart guy. He's got a college education. How can you not read this? Just, read it really fast. And I'm a really good reader, so I was being very impatient with him until we had Emily. And then we realized, oh, whoops, that's why. And then I realized, oh my goodness, you know what? My brother is dyslexic.
Wow.
He's that's another story, and he's had a life of, real trouble reading and writing and spelling and all of that. And he just always thought that it was because he was dumb and slow. Because back then, they didn't diagnose these things. There wasn't the name for these things, and people didn't know. And so he just always felt like, well, I'm just dumb. I just can't read very well. So as a consequence, he never read. He never tried. He never. But going through this whole process taught me a lot also about him. And not just that he's dyslexic, but now understanding, wow, like he really was slow at reading and really could. He's extremely dyslexic. Emily is just a little less. But a very interesting story that I'd like to share with Emily, about Emily. And this is so true. We all have stories that are similar to this. Is that while she was going through this, she was having a hard time learning how to read. And this was right before we got this other program. And I was still searching for a good program for her. And I started praying just really hard every day. I was like, Heavenly Father, I've tried everything. Please help me. Please show me. Guide me to what program do I need that I can teach her? Do I need to create a program? Something to help her be able to read and get along. And my answer, I prayed for several weeks for this, and that during that period is when I found Reading Horizons. And when I saw it and I realized this looked different than other programs, I just felt boom. I felt like the piece of the puzzle had just fallen into place. And I was like, I think this is the program that I need to get. But the other half of the answer was I was told, tell her to read from the Book of Mormon every day of her life. And she will not have a problem reading. And so at the time, we always have family time at night, instead of family home evening just once a week, because neither one of us grew up with that. So we would always forget to have it. We weren't used to it. And so we decided long ago, when Jessica was just a baby, we were like, you know what, we just need to do a little something, not make it a big production, but just do a little something every single night so that it builds that habit. And so we just called it family time. So for all of our married life now, we've had family time and the kids will join. But at that time, we would let Jonathan and Jessica read. And Bob would read a little bit, and then I would read most of it because I'm the fastest reader. So we would all take turns reading, and we wouldn't make Emily read because she would get frustrated and feel bad, and then it would take forever. And so when I got that answer, I was like, oh, okay, well, we're going to change some things. We're going to take it very slow, and I don't care how long it takes. We're just going to be patient, and we're doing this. So we told the whole family, this is what we're going to do, and everybody was on board. And so she started reading from the Book of Mormon, even if it was just one verse.
Wow.
She would read from the Book of Mormon every single day. So she was probably around, at this point, I think she was 7 or 8, I think. Still having a big time hurdle trying to learn how to read. So I got the Reading Horizons program, and we got the Book of Mormon, and we decided she's going to have her equal turn to read. In less than 6 months, she climbed that hurdle. She went over that hump.
Wow.
And she was on the downward swing after that. She was able to read. Within a year, she had skipped ahead 2 reading levels. And ever since then, even now that she's at the end of her college career, coming up on the end of her college career, she will tell you that to this day, as long as she reads her scriptures every single day, she does not have a problem reading. There have been times that she got lazy or that she just wanted to just have fun and, all the gospel stuff. We all go through these ups and downs, right? And she wasn't as, her heart wasn't in the gospel as much as it could have been. And she would just forget to read from the scriptures. Oh, I don't have to. I don't have time. I've got too much homework. I've got too many parties to go to. I've got whatever the reason. And every time that she stopped, her reading would backslide. Wow. Every single time. She's coming up on, 24 years old. So for the past, several years, she has noticed if I don't read my scriptures, then the rest of her reading starts backsliding. When she keeps that promise, because that was my instruction from the Spirit, is she has to make this commitment herself. And when she's committed to doing that and keeps that word that she'll do it, I will help her and she will not have problem reading. So when she's studying her scriptures, she can read in class or wherever, and most people will never even know that she has dyslexia.
Wow.
But that has been a huge life changer for her. And that's something I'm grateful for, is the gift of personal revelation. Because we have, I could just say, copy and paste that kind of story for each one of us in our family several times over in different circumstances. If you pray, if you read the scriptures, if you pay your tithing, if you attend the temple, if you attend church, if you do these things, you get the blessings that come from doing those things. And it took us a while, but we realized, those are the blessings we've always been seeking. And the Lord has been sitting there telling us, I've been trying to tell you. I'm not telling you these things just to control you. I'm telling you because I'm just showing you what the path is to those blessings that you so desperately are seeking. This is the path. I'm trying to show you just what the path is. And we're over here going, you can't be the boss of me.
Aww. So that's a real testament to individual instruction from the Lord, though. Yes. He knows what each of us needs right then, yes. And in addition to our entire lives. That's really cool. It's a great tie into homeschooling, isn't it?
Yeah. So the Lord has been the one that told us to homeschool, and the Lord has been the one that sustained us in our homeschooling, because let me tell you, it is not easy. Those kids will never tell their teachers, I don't want to, and kick their feet up the way they will with mama.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things I did is I let the kids know, when we're doing school, I'm not your mama, I'm your teacher. Don't talk to me that way. And so they kind of, the older two kids had gone 1 year each to mm-hmm. school, and of course, being in Sunday school and primary, and they know what a teacher is, and they would never talk to those teachers that way. And so Bob was the principal, and sometimes they had to be sent to the principal. So they were.
That's great.
But I was like, okay, school time, I'm not your mama right now, I'm your teacher.
Yeah.
So, but it was great. It was a great experience, and my favorite part is that they grew up in the world. So many people fear that homeschooling just, that you overprotect the kids. And darn tootin' right that we protect them in the ways that they need to be protected. They're not ready for all of the adult everything at that age. But at the same time, we also raise them in the world, but we're right there next to them to explain it to them immediately, so they'll see something good happen or something bad happen, and we can take that moment right then, because for kids, that's important. It has to happen right then. It can't happen 2 weeks later. Mm-hmm. So right then you stop and go, did you see that? Yeah. How come that happened? Well, because of this. Or what do you think about that? Or, tell me what you think. So that was awesome. I loved raising them not inside of four walls, but in the world, around people of all backgrounds, of all beliefs, of all everything, of all ages, grateful that we raised them around kids of all ages every day. They were around people, all kinds of different people. And one of our favorite family memories is taking a trip up to Lubbock to see my grandma, who had moved to Lubbock when we did. And we saw a whole cotton field that was just ripe for the picking. And the kids just got fascinated by it. Look at the cotton. So we pulled over. Bob just decided on the spur of the moment to pull over. And we were standing right there in the cotton. We could touch it. We could feel it. And he started asking the kids, well, you know, that's what your t-shirt's made out of, is cotton. Do you know how it got to be a t-shirt? No. So we had a little mini science lesson on the side of the highway of how cotton gets to be a t-shirt.
Wow.
And they never forgot that, you know. So millions of other lessons like that we were able to teach them.
And it's a family memory. You all
and it's a family
it
memory also, you know, to boot. I would take them grocery shopping, and, you know, sometimes those sales are kind of tricksy. And so they're like, you'll get a gallon of milk, you know, for $2.50. But then you see the half gallon and it's on sale for $1.30. And so I was like, okay, kids, no calculator, no nothing, just do it in your head. Which one is the better deal? Which one this is a gallon, this is a half gallon, this one is $2.50, this one is on sale for $1.30. So if you get 2 half gallons, you know, first of all, I'm like, how many half gallons do you need? Oh, 2. Okay, so you get 2 half gallons
Good
to make
practical
a gallon, you know, then which one is the better deal? And they're like, well, the sale one. You add it up in your head and you tell me. And they're like, oh, wait, if you get the 2, that's $2.60. And this one's only $2.50, but that one says sale. I'm like, so they get a little economics lesson too.
Yeah.
So just multiply that times 1,000. And
there's a lot of joy in those light bulb moments, aren't there? When you get to see them.
That is the joy of parenthood. My whole life I thought, okay, so if we live the gospel and we make it to the celestial kingdom, is that going to be boring? Raising kids for eternity, and you just have your family for eternity, and like, what are you going to do? Isn't that going to be boring? Until I had kids, and I realized, oh my gosh, there's no greater joy than to see your kids have those light bulb moments, whether it's math or whether it's something spiritual, and especially if it's spiritual and they make a choice to commit to it. Wow. Nothing beats that. Nothing beats that. So to be able to educate them at home and include not only the gospel in every aspect that they're learning as well, because, hello, that's where this all comes from. All knowledge comes from the Lord, and yet to be able to experience those moments with them. I did have, like I said, the 2 older kids went to school. Jonathan he attended kindergarten in school, and then he kind of was really turned off by that because I had already taught him when he was 3 how to write in cursive. He actually was kind of a little bit artistic, so he would draw, and he was, of the 3 kids, he was the best one at cursive. He had beautiful cursive. So he goes in, and within like a month or 2 of being in kindergarten, the teacher saw that he wrote his assignment in cursive, and she laid into him in front of the whole class, and he was permanently mortified. To this day, you don't embarrass him in front of other people. That's one. And he never, ever wrote in cursive after that. And
that breaks your heart.
Yeah, that was not a happy moment. But, you know, that was one of the things that I learned, how, you know, and I can't really say that I blame public schools. They have to do things in a certain way. It has to be a group lesson. It has to be conformity and to a certain degree, right? Because you've got so many kids there. And anyway, I just, with both of them, I just saw little things that I didn't like about how public schooling was affecting them and how it affected their relationship here at home. And yeah, it just, and I missed, and this was one of the things that really, really, really made me grateful for homeschooling, is I witnessed for myself how in public school they will learn things, whether it's something that the teacher taught them regarding the actual subject that they're studying, or whether it's something they pick up from a friend, or even a teacher that's more social and cultural rather than what's in the books. Either one, both, in every single way, they will learn stuff at school that I don't find out about until weeks, maybe even months later. But by that time, the child has already been thinking, this is the way it is. Mm-hmm. So then the parent comes in and tries to correct that, and all of a sudden, no, mom and dad, you don't know. You don't know. This is the way it is. And that is really, really hard when what they're believing is incorrect. And especially if it's something that's incorrect in terms of gospel principles. It's really hard to go back and fix that. Mm-hmm. And I noticed that a lot. The kids fought a lot more when they were in public school because they didn't have anything in common anymore here at home, so there was a competition thing. And I didn't like how they would, even on their schoolwork, they would get something wrong and the teacher would take days, sometimes weeks, before that test would come back. And then it was marked up and they got, a 70 or they got a 90 or they got whatever. But the wrong questions, the questions they answered wrong, they were never taught why they got it wrong and how to correct it. And they never went back to visit it.
So it's that critical, talk about instant holds. Feedback that's really valuable.
Yeah, a lot of people are concerned about, well, what about holds in their education? And I realized there's holes everywhere you go. There's holes in public education. There's no such thing. It's not possible to teach a child everything without holes. So you have to choose what's the most important things to teach them, right? But I really appreciated that I was right there whenever they took a test. They would take the test and immediately they could get that feedback. I would grade it and then we would sit down the next day when we started that lesson again. We don't just move on to the next lesson like they would in school. We'll sit down and go, okay, yesterday we took this test and you did really, really good on this and this is why. But we need some work on this side, on this part. Why? Why did we get it wrong and how do we fix it? So immediately they could fix that and they would retake that test. Normally what I would do is the curriculum I use is very structured and it was a very old-fashioned one, so it had a lot, specifically in language and math, it had a lot of problems. So I would normally only do like the even problems or the odd problems. And then if they got a bad grade, well, then we'll go back and relearn that lesson. We don't move forward until we learn the lesson. Then we move forward. I had that in my little tiny school growing up, and that's invaluable. I think we do a lot of damage if we don't take the time to stop before we get so far into the mire that we can't get back out. Mm-hmm. And so then you compare that, it becomes a really, really easy gospel lesson, life lesson, because the same applies to the gospel. You don't keep going down the road of making bad choices, because then you get to the point where you can't get back out. It's really, really hard to get back out. It's better to stop it while you're still at the beginning and to try and catch that. And it's important to listen to those who are trying to help you stop it before you go down. So listen to the prophets, listen to the apostles, because they're the teachers. They're the ones teaching us. So I love educating kids at home because it's a whole life education, and you can catch things really early, and you can ensure that what they're learning, that they're really learning it. And absolutely one of the best parts as well is when I'm homeschooling the kids, I know what they know and I know what they don't know. When they're in public school, not so much, because
it's
again,
really hard to find out.
It's hard to find out. They're very tight-lipped. They'll only let you in up to a certain point. They don't let you pass the wall. And it's hard to go, like I said, to go back. You find out 2 months later that they've been doing it the wrong way, or they've made a mistake or whatever, and they never went back and learned why it was wrong. So they never learned it. So big hole in education. There's so many holes, I think, in public education. And again, especially not faulting the teachers, because they're not the ones that set up the whole education system. But it's just the nature of the beast, you know?
It's the institution.
Yeah, it's the institution. So you try and do the best you can. I don't fault it. Parents who try and teach, I know that not everybody can, not everybody wants to, not everybody will. So hopefully, we do the best we can with what we've got. But I am so grateful that I was able to educate them at home because of all these reasons. And even though one of our kids, our oldest, has decided to leave the church and actually leave the family, to this day she still is very grateful that she was home educated as well. And all three of them, it has taught them to think for themselves. And that's something that's huge, I think, for me, is you're not telling them and teaching them how to be and how to think. You want to teach them to think for themselves, but using correct principles. Mm-hmm. And those correct principles, a lot of them are missing in the public education system, just by the way it's designed. So yeah, it's been a huge, huge blessing. And I think for me personally, the biggest lesson from it, I learned and started learning, and then it took me 20 years to learn it, is they're not going to learn from me unless I'm setting the example. And that's not just when it comes to reading and writing and arithmetic, but in every aspect of life. If I want them to listen to me, then I need to be listenable too.
It's kind of a humbling realization, right?
It is, because I realized, whoa, this is on me. I can't escape this. And so yeah, and I love to learn. I always was one of those kids that loved school. I loved school. My mom says I would come home all the days of my life. I would come home and make extra homework for myself because I love school. And then I'd go play school with my friends.
Oh my goodness.
So I love school. I love learning. And to this day, I still do. I love to learn and learn. I can never learn enough. But I realized that there's a lot of character learning, a lot of learning about patience, a lot of learning about setting a good example. Don't just say, but do, and study along with them. Set the example of reading. Let them see you reading. Let them see you study. Let them see you figuring problems out. I tried to point out, they may or may not even remember this, but I tried to point out a lot. You hear a lot of complaints from normally schooled kids that, oh, I hate math, and what do you need math for? So I try and point it out. Look, I need to cook. I need to figure out, if I want to cut the recipe in thirds, I need to know how to figure that out. Look, I want to buy, this gallon of milk, but look, the half gallons are on sale. So I need to save money so that I can budget, because budgeting, you need math for budgeting.
Mm-hmm.
Science, you need to know science for some things. And callings that we had, I was a Cub Den leader one time, and so we were shooting off rockets and doing all kinds of other things, and there's a lot of safety involved. Well, why? Well, what's the science behind it? And so I would point it out. See, you need math. See, you need to learn science. You need to learn at least the basics. You need to learn these things because it helps you in your everyday life. And it's not just, oh, I hate it, and what do I need this for? I'm never going to be a scientist, so why do I need this for? Well, because everything you do in life is tied up with science or math in some way.
Yeah.
And history. History is the other big one too. So
that's really, really neat. Man, those children that you've worked with, your kids and, the Cubs and everyone, they've been really lucky to work with you, because you've had to go through life learning and continue to figure things out. And that's really neat that you've passed on that passion for learning and thinking for yourself to the next generation. That's a huge gift that you've been able to pass on.
Well, I consider it a blessing to be able to have done that, and hope that I was able to pass it on. One of the biggest things in my recent life, just since we moved here in Plano, was I was approached several years ago, back in 2007, 2006, by 3 other sisters in the state, and they wanted to teach a Constitution class for the high school kids.
I heard about that. Yeah.
Homeschooling. And so they wanted me to join them in the fort, because they knew at the time I was involved with a particular candidates, which later I regretted, but I was involved with their campaign, and so I was I've always been interested in politics and history, and how those two are just two links to the same thing. And so my parents had always raised us, even though we were in Mexico, my parents had always told us that they wanted us to come out to the U.S. to do high school so that we could go to an American university and hopefully live in the U.S. And they taught us that this is a special land and why it's special, and about the founding fathers. And so I just always grew up feeling like, ooh, that's really special. That's a special place. And so they approached me. I had started getting kind of a little more, more of a political junkie and getting more involved. And so I thought, oh yeah, I would love to help teach a class on the Constitution. Because of this campaign that I was on, I was kind of going forward on this campaign, and then I realized some things that I didn't like to realize about the campaign, and I realized this candidate is not who I thought that he was going to be, and then I thought, well, okay, but exactly what should he be? And I couldn't answer that. I just knew that what I was seeing and hearing was, and feeling also, was no. And so I realized, if I'm going to want to help people understand, I need to understand. If I'm going to vote for somebody, I need to understand better, like, what am I supposed to be voting for? How am I supposed to be voting, and things like that. And so I had kind of started already thinking, well, I need to learn a little bit. Like, I don't know anything about the Constitution. I know there's 3 branches of government, and basically the basics that everybody else has been taught, which is really not a whole lot. Like, it tells you what it is, but it doesn't tell you how and why, and the long-term effects. It doesn't teach you any of that. And so I was like, how can I learn about that? So I kind of started doing a little reading. And then they approached me about teaching this class, so I thought, oh, yeah, I'd be interested in that. And they already knew the books that they wanted to use. And so I thought, great, I'll read those books too. And so as things just turned out, I don't know why it turned out this way, but it did. One of the sisters just decided, well, I just kind of want to be a secretary. I don't really want to teach. Okay. So the three of us that were left were taking turns teaching, but then one of them kind of was never prepared and like never, I think that she was just really busy with lots of little kids still that she was raising, and so she would ask the other two of us, well, can you sub for me? Can you sub for me? And then eventually the other one that was doing it, I don't know what was going on, but for some reason kind of like ended up not coming as often. And so I ended up subbing a lot. And so finally I just approached him and was like, I noticed that we're like not sharing as much and I'm subbing a lot. So I'm perfectly fine if you guys want me to just take over as the lead for teaching. Is that something that you're into? And they're like, oh yes, please, please, please. It's like, okay.
I can see the relief on their face.
They were relieved, I think.
Yeah.
And I didn't mind. I just thought it'll just be so much easier if I just know that I'm supposed to teach every week instead of last minute stuff. Which was very stressful for me because then I'm like, well, I'm not prepared. What do you mean I have to teach today? And so I started leading the class. And that got me started on something that I didn't know would be a passion of mine. And that is to teach the rising generation about our nation. And, sorry.
The tears
passionate.
are good.
Our republic and our founders, the how, the why, the when. And I realized I'm going to study what the founders studied. I want to know what they knew. And I want to read from those people and those philosophers and those politicians and accountants and everybody that they learned from. And I want to know this Constitution in and out, and the Declaration and the Bill of Rights. I want to know what they knew, because they knew something special that most of us don't know today. What is that? And that started me on the path. So that first round of lessons, it's a 3-year class because it's really meant to be taught every single day to high school students.
And you developed this.
Well, no, it was already, the class is developed already by the National Center for Constitutional Studies.
Oh, okay.
So it's using the 5,000 Year Leap and The Making of America. Those are the two books.
They're both great books. Okay, we're going to have to do part 2 of this interview. And
Okay.
you tell us all about the Constitution. That would be fascinating.
So that got me started on that, and I taught that 3-year class, and then we had a hiatus for, I think, 2 or 3 years, because just the way our homeschool group, like there was a lot of kids in this age group and a lot of kids in the younger age group and a whole lot of, not a lot of kids in between. So we kind of skipped a few years because there wasn't a lot of students. And then when Emily got to be that age, I did another whole round. And it was amazing. It's an amazing class. And I think every American citizen needs to take that class in some form or another, because it dissects, literally dissects the Constitution. Not even sentence by sentence. He goes provision by provision.
Wow.
So sometimes there'll be 2 or 3 provisions within a sentence. And so you learn the 5,000 Year Leap, which is the foundation, and that's the foundational principles. He spent over almost or a little over 40 years researching primary sources, specifically traveling the world and traveling the nation, trying to put these books together for the same reason. He wanted to know, what did the founders know? What drove them? Why did they make these decisions? What is it that they're basing all of this on? And that's what these books are. And so I can just say I've had most of the kids all enjoyed it. I had just a couple, 2 or 3, that were like, oh, my mom made me come.
There's always 2 or 3
There's
in every
always
group, let's be
some.
honest.
But there were like 3 or 4 that chose to become lawyers or chose to go into political science.
Wow.
Because of that class, because they realized that's a passion of mine. And so that made me very happy, not in a proud way, but in a, oh, Heavenly Father, thank you for leading me down this road, that I could help these kids, do this. So I'll share 2 things. I won't get into the whole class. For the 5,000 year leap, we take a whole year to study that. And then for the Making of America, we take 2 years to study that. So during the second year, when we start the Making of America, one of the first things that we do on the first day of school, first day of class, is I pull out this test that was written by H. Verlin Anderson, fantastic professor of law at BYU, and just fantastic guy. And he would teach upper, so junior and senior level law school at BYU. And his son published this, and so this is where I heard about it. It's kind of just a quiz. It has like 100 questions on it, and you go through this quiz. Do you think that the federal government should, be in charge of education? Do you think that they should mandate this? Do you think that they should have rules for this? Do you think that, what do you think? And so you just take this test, right? He would give it to his students, his law students. So most of these people were already, like I said, juniors and seniors, already returned missionaries, already knew the gospel.
And they've seen some of the world.
They've seen some of the world,
okay.
Right? So he would give them this test, and without fail, anywhere from 60 to 90% of students would, quote unquote, fail this test. Because when he gives out the answers, he would go back and give out the answers right then, right after everybody took the test.
Instant feedback, noticing the good educational.
Feedback.
Okay.
And they would realize that all of the answers that they gave are according to communism. And yet, it is exactly what the United States has been doing for 100 years. Those are the communist answers, not capitalism and not constitutional republic answers.
Jonathan, did you take that test?
We hadn't developed it yet.
Okay. Oh, that's right. It was with Emily.
It was with Emily.
Man.
And so I would do this with my kids, because what I loved about this class is the kids will come in and they know everything, right? They're high school kids, and we're just going to have fun, and it's at Sister Nine's house, and let's just be rowdy and whatever. So we come in, and they're like, oh yeah, I'm going to learn about the Constitution. So they come in and they take this test, and they're all feeling very confident, because they answered according to what they have been raised with, right? Not parents, but like society and government-wise. We've all been raised by this. We all think, for 125 years right now, we've been raised thinking that this is normal for government to have these programs and do these things. So they take this test, and then immediate feedback, go back and give them the right answer, and then start teaching. These are the communist answers. And their faces just, what? These are communist answers. Now we're going to learn why in the next 2 years.
And here's the Constitution.
And I see this change in the majority of these kids. I see this change in their faces. From the first week that they come, because it's like a 3.5 hour class once a week.
Oh, wow. Okay. Oh, because you take 5 days.
Because we're taking 5 days.
Okay, gotcha.
Down to 1 day. We would normally do it right before MCO.
Oh boy!
So we would
just pack it in there,
and then the parents would drop them off here, and they can do whatever with the younger siblings, and then come and get them and go to MCO, because we were right by MCO.
Yeah, I missed that.
So I loved seeing and I say this with love, I'm not saying this nasty. I love seeing their ignorant faces when they come in, right?
But the nicest way possible.
Ignorant, like the dictionary definition, meaning through no fault of your own, you're unaware of something. Mm-hmm. That's ignorant. Stupid is you choose to do that. Ignorant is no fault of your own. And so they come in and they're just, and then they have this realization, this wake up moment. They've already got a year behind them, so they already understand the 28 principles of freedom. And they think that they know what they're doing, right? And then they realize they all just voted for communism.
Oh my goodness.
And they're like, oh,
it's too late now. Just kidding.
Yeah, too late. And so I see them go from that throughout the year, and it's visible. I can see it on their faces, where throughout the next 2 years, they start learning, and those light bulbs start going off, and I see it, and I'm right here, and I'm witnessing it, and I see them start understanding. That's why the founders did that. Oh my gosh. And then they start, part of our class is do papers on current events. And then they start getting mad. Well, why has the government been doing this? And why have they been doing it? And we have discussions. And a lot of these, every class that they come to, they will lead half of the class. So they come with an assignment and they have to present it. Essentially, they teach the lesson for that day and bring their projects or whatever. And so, and it's fun because they can make up games or they can do whatever to get people to participate. But they love doing that. And it gets them involved and it keeps them focused and it keeps them learning. And I can see in their heads those wheels start turning over that process of 2 years. By the end of those 2 years, I've got a whole class of teenagers that are just, really? Okay, but what about this? And what about that? But I just heard
they're
on the
engaged.
News. They're totally engaged. And they're like, but I heard on the news about this. So what do you think about that? What did the founder say about that? And just totally engaged and aware of what's going on, the way it should be, as opposed to the way that it is. And then the classic question, but Sister Nine, what can we do about it? And that is my favorite question of all. And then I'm like, let's brainstorm. What can we do about it? What do you think the founders have said? What do you think we should be doing about it? So many answers to that question. There's a lot that we can do about it. But one of them, and this is the second part that I love about that class. One is seeing those kids go through that process, realizing, oh, holy moly, we're living with a lot of communistic ideals here. Mm-hmm. And then realizing that's not the way it should be. This is the way it should be. And then the second part that I love about the whole class, is a process that I went through as well, and they've gone through, is we always, of course, start out with prayer. And there have been several times that as I was teaching a concept or a principle or a whatever, I would be speaking to the kids trying to explain, because a lot of times, a lot of the book is written through the first person quotes. So letters and journal entries and, from the founders. And we don't speak exactly the same way that they did. We're a lot more dumbed down these days. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of hard, for 15 to 17, 18-year-olds to, well, what exactly did he say? Because it's like scriptures. They start talking about this and then they go off into a side note here and a side note there, and then they come back to this. And so they kind of lose track of where's the main thread here. Mm-hmm. And so they were like, well, what exactly does this mean? So I'll explain what these things mean. And as I'm explaining, I've had this happen a few times. It's almost, I don't know how to describe it other than to say it's almost like I go into almost like tunnel vision, if you've ever had tunnel vision, where it's almost like I feel like I'm being pulled back and like it's not me talking. And the things that are coming out my mouth that I'm explaining to them, I am in the back of my head going, oh, wow, I didn't know that. And I feel the Spirit totally take over and start teaching. And every single time that happened, there was not a dry eye in the room. The kids would get emotional. I got emotional, testifying of whatever, of different things. One time it was the story of George Washington, the very moment when he was talking to the troops in Trenton, and he had to bolster them up. They were all ready to just walk away, and had they, we would have lost. And he had gotten a letter, and he wanted to read a letter to them, and he stopped and said, "Excuse me, I need to put my glasses on." And that's when they realized, wow, this is really taking a toll on him. Like somehow that just touched the troops, that his eyesight had gotten so bad from the stress and from, because it wasn't like he was necessarily old.
Mm.
And it just really, it touched them back in that age. I don't know if it would today, but it did touch them back in that age, going, he has sacrificed his whole life for us and for this country. And we can't just be babies and sit here and cry and complain. He's doing this without pay. We can do this without pay. This is important. And that, just explaining that scenario and reading that to the kids and explain, we were all in tears. And the reason we're in tears is because the Spirit's touching our souls, explaining to us the importance of what took place that night. I can't do that. I can't teach them that. Only the Spirit can teach them that. And so for them to walk out of our MOA class, the Making of America, so I call it the MOA class, after 3 years, being completely American and understanding, wow, we owe everything to the founders and we need to live up to that, is everything. Because that's going to secure not only their liberties and freedoms, but their children's and their children's children, and on for generations. So
it's a promise of the Book of Mormon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And not all of them. You know, I'm conservative. I hate to say Republican or Democrat because I think that the founders never intended parties, but definitely conservative. I'm, pro everything that the founders were for. So we don't teach the kids, be one or the other. No, we're teaching them this is what the founders gave us. This was their original intent, and this is where they said it. Look, and they hear it from them themselves. And so then, what are we going to do with it moving forward? Amazing, just an amazing experience, and I feel blessed to have had that experience, because to me, one of those experiences with the Spirit was talking through my mouth, and I was just like, wow, was when I realized, and the Spirit taught me, is that the Constitution and the gospel of Jesus Christ are two sides of the same coin. They're the same exact thing. And this is what the founders knew. They studied the gospel. They studied the Bible. Jefferson went and studied the Bible in the original Greek because he knew that it had been mistranslated in some places when it was translated into English. And he says, I don't want to miss a beat. I want to know exactly what the Greek one said. So he taught himself Greek and studied it in Greek. And that's where he learned the gospel is going to be restored to the earth one day. I'll probably not even be alive when it happens. He was alive when it happened.
Was he? I did not know that.
But
wow.
He didn't know yet. But he understood, and George Washington understood. John Adams, several of them understood that what we've got right now in the churches is good, and so this is what we work with. But it's not the restored, it's not original Christianity the way Christ taught it. That's going to be restored because the scriptures say it's going to be restored. And they knew that they were setting up a nation so that it could be restored. The founders knew that. What kind of impact does that have on kids when they learn that the church that they belong to is that restored church? And the way, we've got the first presidency and the two counselors. Moses had Aaron, and who was the other one? Jethro told him, you need like two counselors, right? So he had two counselors. So we have the president, and then we have the legislative, and we have the judicial. Those are the counselors. And you
that's
help
cool.
each other.
Okay, we really need to do another interview because I wanna pick your brain more about this. That's really exciting.
Those are just some of the things that I learned when the Spirit just kind of took over, and then I tried to really instill it in the kids as well, because they were right there when it happened. And so I was like, do you feel that? That's the Spirit. And they knew it, and I knew it, and it was just amazing. And the camaraderie that it built, like between the kids and me, it's kind of like we're family. I had somebody, I haven't taught the class because I don't have kids that I'm homeschooling anymore. And I've tried to reach out. I don't know, there's not like a group per se that I can reach out to. And so some people that I know that are homeschooling, I'm like, can you ask around if anybody's interested? I would still love to, I'm still trying to find people to teach this coming fall. But so it's been a few years since I taught the last class, and just maybe about a year ago, I had one of the students that I'm friends with them on Facebook, of course. And so he reached out to me on Messenger. He had been traveling in Europe and came across one of the other guys that was in MOA.
Oh.
So not only did they see each other as, hey, there's another member of the church, but they had that connection. Hey, there's another MOA student. And they got a picture for me at the airport and sent it to me and said, hey, Sister Nine, look who I ran into in Brussels.
Oh my goodness.
Priceless.
Instant joy.
Just that feeling of, we're together. We're a family. We do this together. We learned it together. It connects you, and there's something special about that.
That's really special.
So, yeah, that's a passion of mine.
I'm so glad that you've been able to share that with me. I've enjoyed our time together.
Thanks.
Do you feel like you got to share everything you wanted to?
Yeah.
The tip of the iceberg.
Well, the most important thing is that God lives. He has kept his word, that he does everything through the mouth of his prophets. He has a prophet. Jesus Christ is his son, and he has restored his gospel through Joseph Smith. And I find it interesting. Most people don't have a problem believing that the Virgin Mary appeared to somebody, or that, seances and you have dead people appear to you. People from all walks of life, right? But somehow the adversary gets us to think that it's impossible that the God of heaven and earth would appear to another boy prophet and lead him to restore his gospel the way he said he would thousands of years ago, and the way that prophets have testified forever. So yeah, it's real. It's all real. And my life has taught me that. I've had personal experiences. This is not something that comes from my own mind or wishes. You can tell when the Spirit testifies to you, and you can tell that it's coming from outside of your own self. I've had a lot of experiences that have solidified that testimony for me. And I think I lost my parents about 31 years ago almost, when they died in a plane crash, and having them come to me in a vision and understanding that the hereafter is really real. I think that was also one of the big events that solidified that testimony for me. And again, you can tell it's not just a dream. No, I don't do drugs. And no, it didn't come from me. It came from outside of me, completely unawares, and yet so real. So real. So it's all real. It's all true. And the most important thing we can do is find Jesus Christ and get to know him.
Thank you, Teri.
Yeah.
I feel really grateful I've gotten to know you better and to share that with the ward. This is a real treasure. And thank you. I have one more question.
I'm honored.
Do you have anybody to nominate to be interviewed?
Emily. No. I'm teasing.
Teenagers, kids are okay too?
Gosh.
So many good people, right?
So many good people. I think I will nominate 2 people.
Okay.
One is Sophia Wang.
Oh, yes. Yes.
She's got some good stories too. I think everybody's got good stories. I just happen to know some of her stories. And the other one, I would say Tina Walker. She's got
both solid, yes.
Some
Okay.
experiences there.
All right. Got to put on my running shoes, catch these sisters. Thank you, Teri. I look forward to talking to you again, part 2 for Constitution and the Gospel.
If you insist.
If you're up to it. All right. Well, I'll see you next time.